So I listened to the previous podcast, and there is definitely that banging sound in the background, but it's mostly audible, quite easily audible. So I'm going to continue because the work is still going on, and they will probably still make more banging sound soon. Um, I just like to keep this going because I have lots of things to cover, and I do try to do one or two podcasts per day as I find time. Sometimes you travel and you're doing other things, so obviously it's not possible. I would suggest this 5-minute rule. If you want to accomplish something, you shouldn't wait to find the time to do it. You should squeeze in 5 minutes every day to keep doing it, so that slowly within few months you will see progress. Then it begins to snowball into more and more rapid action to progress. Okay, that's a philosophy. That's not mine. It was proposed by Jerry Seinfeld, as well as don't break the chain, he said. And I think Dan and Chip Heath mention it in their book called Switch: How to Make Change When Change is Difficult, and so on. So coming back to the syntax of institutional statements in the context of sustaining the commons, let's look at the aim component of ADICO that we've been looking at. The aim is the specific description of a working part in an action situation to which an institutional statement refers. The description can include information about a process, so filling out a form at the US Post Office for something, for example, or a formula: pay $10 per hour worked, piecemeal work that we talked about. In order for an institutional statement to influence behavior, the aim must be physically possible, and contradiction need also be physically possible. An individual cannot logically be required to undertake a physically impossible action, and prescribing an action can only influence behavior if it is physically possible to not do that action. So if you say don't cross this line, then there has to be some fence and a gate, for example. Just as an example, the capability of voting implies the capability of not voting. Voting for candidate A implies the option of not voting for candidate A as well. The aim sometimes specifies states of affairs in the world or an outcome instead of an action. Outcomes, like actions, must also be possible and avoidable to be parts of a well-formed institutional statement. This is why syntax is important, to make sure that what is handed down as an institutional statement must meet certain conditions. ADICO. Moreover, any particular outcome implies the existence of the contradicting outcome. In example 1, the aim is the minimum age of 10 years, being a resident of Arizona, and the fee that needs to be paid in order to receive a valid hunter's license or a fishing license that we talked about before. In the second example, the aim is the action of producing a valid ID to buy alcohol. The aim in the third example is to put traps at the right place in the case of Maine lobstermen. The aim in lobster, you say fishermen, so is it okay to say lobstermen? Lobsterists, you have to be gender neutral, right? The aim in the fourth example is cleaning the microwave. Finally, the aim in the fifth example is strategy. Finally, the aim in the fifth example, the strategy, is the action of calling back when the call gets cut off. The aim often supplies the focus for studies and debates such as the same-sex marriage debate. Okay, so it supplies focus studies. The aim often supplies the focus for studies and debates such as the same-sex marriage debate. Okay, what you can and cannot do. Okay, there are many examples of that I will not go into because that's very US specific right now, because Europe is dealing with it in a different way. Other countries may or may not talk about it at all, and so on. Let's move on to conditions. In ADICO, we have ADICO. C is conditions. Conditions indicate the set of variables that define when and where an institutional statement applies. For example, the conditions for a statement might indicate when a statement applies, such as during certain weather conditions, at a set time, or a particular step in the process, some process. Likewise, the conditions might indicate where a statement applies, such as a particular jurisdictional area, like Arizona, or in Malaysia. If an institutional statement does not specify particular variables, the default value for the conditions is in all situations, at all times, in all places covered by the rule, norm, or strategy. Thus, like the attribute, the condition component always has some value in it, even when the institutional statement fails to overtly specify it. So there is always an implicit condition included. The conditions in the syntax of the statement. The conditions component in the first example refers to the state of Arizona for fishing license, since the institutional statement refers to a state-specific regulation. The conditions component in the second examples indicate, buying alcohol indicates that a valid ID needs to be provided when the establishment where liquor is bought requests this. The strategy in the fifth example applies when a telephone call is disconnected. The third and fourth examples do not specify specific conditions. Therefore, we assume that the rules apply for main fishers and microwave users under all circumstances. Note that conditions often apply to physical reality. For example, when a call is disconnected, this is when that rule applies, that you have to call back. Or it's your responsibility to call back. However, conditions are often specified by scope rules that restrict choices to very specific conditions, which we talked about in terms of alcohol. You may have the permit, a valid license, or the ID to buy alcohol, but you cannot buy on Sunday, right? So that's the choice scope rule. Finally, or else, the final component of the institutional syntax is the consequence that an institutional statement assigns to detected non-compliance with other components of the statement. In some cases, the or else specifies a range of possible sanctions if a rule is not followed. Individuals in the community know that if they violate a rule, they face the probability that a sanction in a specified range will be applied, and that others in a similar situation face the same range. Only rules include an or else. This component consequently plays a crucial role in discerning what a rule is and how rules differ from other institutional statements. Description of sanctions for breaking a rule are a common type of or else statement, but the or else may take other forms. The or else might also shift to deontic, assigned to some other action. For example, a violator might be forbidden to vote or engage in some other action that would otherwise be permitted. So if you're a minor, you cannot vote. If you're not a citizen, you cannot vote in most countries. The or else might also shift the deontic assigned to some activity for an individual from permitted to obligatory. These are details, but you can always find the examples. I'm just reading them because this is critical for institutional analysis and development framework. The violator might be required to allocate resources to a public jurisdiction, like paying a fine, or another actor might be required to check on the violator. These actions might be permitted under all other conditions, but obligatory when the condition of a violation of the rule is met. Although the or else often refers to physical punishments, or the or else may also be although the or else often refers to physical punishments, the or else may also involve institutional actions such as taking away a position, like losing your driver's license, or refusing to accept an amendment that you will be forbidden from fishing, let's say or forbidden from catching lobsters if you violate the rule many times or some such thing. For example, one of the rules governing the amendment process may state that legislatures with attributes, certain attributes, must take a particular action when voting for an amendment, or else the amendment fails. Okay, so should I continue? I'm pretty close to the end, so we are at 11 minutes, so let me continue and see if I can just wrap it up. Yeah, maybe I'll just keep going. 3 qualifications must be met for an or else to exist. First, the consequence stated in the or else must be the result of collective action. Institutional statement means that a collective decision must have been made in a relevant collective choice arena to determine the consequence. Hence, individual revenge is not a valid component of an or else statement. Institutionally, it cannot be sanctioned. Second, the threat in the or else component of a rule must be backed by another rule or norm that changes the deontic assigned to some aim or action for at least one actor under the condition that the individuals fail to follow the rule. Often the actions threatened in or else are forbidden under most conditions, for example, imposing a fine, incarcerating a citizen, or taking someone's livestock and putting them in a village pen, and so on. The prescription backing the or else makes the action permitted or required under in the condition that someone breaks a rule. It's all legalese in that sense, but it is kind of important in making sure that the syntax is accurate and enforceable, right? Third, in order for an or else to exist, a prescription must affect the constraints and opportunities facing an actor or actors with the responsibility of monitoring the conformance of others. The actors who monitor frequently sanctioned non-conforming actors may only report non-conformance to someone else responsible for sanctioning. We do not consider government sponsorship to be a necessary condition for statement to include an or else. Many self-organized communal or private organizations develop rules that include sanctions, another rule or norm that changes the deontic assigned to some aim for at least one actor if that individual fails to follow the rule, and a norm or rule sanctioning prescription that affects the constraints and opportunities facing an actor or actors who take the responsibility to monitor the conformance of others to the prescription. This is a monitoring prescription, right? So basically you can have a private property where you are not allowed to enter or park in a certain residential neighborhood, and so on and so forth. Just to wrap up, turning again to the example of institutional statements listed above, the first 3 examples appear to contain an or else. Of course, we would want to check to be sure that there are rules or norms regarding monitoring and sanctioning that back the stated or else. For example, the potential punishment for fishers who put traps in a different territory is an or else only when rules or norms accepted in that harbor prescribe others to monitor and to employ sanctions defined in the or else. So if the rule says you cannot put your trap in the neighboring zone, then who is monitoring it? So somebody has to be assigned this job. Without the establishment of positions with the authority for monitoring and sanctioning, phrases that contain the words or else, such as cutting off your trap, fail to constitute an or else that distinguishes an institutional statement as a rule as defined herein. That is very legal statement, right? Institutional statements with content in the or else slot then are institutional statements that add information to the action situation about what will happen if a participant violates the prescription. If the participant violates the prescription. Okay. The rule on producing a valid ID indicates that participants who violate this know that if he or she violates the rule, they will face the consequence and cannot buy alcohol. So the latter part is not explicitly stated. You can just say to buy alcohol you must produce a valid ID. It doesn't say or else, but there is an implied or else, and there is an implied monitoring, right? In the first institutional statement, children younger than 10 years of age do not get a hunting license as a consequence of not meeting the conditions. Here, there is no or else. You don't get a license, you don't get to fish. That's about it, right? So the or else component of a rule is frequently linked to a conditions component that specifies the number of times that a rule has been violated. The range of sanctions is likely to be lowest when someone has committed their first offense against a specific rule. A different rule specifying a more stringent range of sanctions will then be applicable if that individual has committed a second or a third or more offenses. Many rules against drunk driving use this form of graduated sanctions and increase the sanction for this offense substantially for second and third offenders. This can be graded in many ways. If you exceed the speed limit by 5 miles per hour, the fine is certain amount, but if you exceed by additional amount of 10, 20, the fines can jump, very steeply. So repeat offense or exceeding by certain thresholds can bring stricter and stricter or else component. Okay, maybe I should definitely stop this here and continue in the next podcast, because this is already 16 minutes. So we'll come back and read on how to read the institutional statements in this syntax context, so that we know what the practical situations are in the syntax of institutional statements and action situations, and what they mean eventually going forward for sustaining the commons. Okay.